want to say thank you all for hopping on here tonight and really our first event in the Springboard series. Really, the goal here today is to really allow you guys to have conversations with your brothers about developing your platform, getting the support from your chapter, and really crushing it during your election day speech, really owning the process. This three-part series is kicking off here tonight, and we are super thankful to have you all join us. So with that being said, welcome to SigEp Springboard, where we are joined here by three of the current student directors, all three of them. Each of them bring their expertise to tonight's session, and I invite you guys to pick their brains, ask away with any questions that you have, and the like. So we have Nathan Kung of Georgia Alpha, Greg Pearson of Missouri Alpha, and Brady Alexander of Florida Alpha. Again, we invite you to engage with the team here and really take note of your questions, as we will answer those after this presentation and before jumping into the breakout rooms following the presentation. So today we are really focusing on the challenge and inspire aspect of your platform, really learning how to create your election platforms and the priorities. Tonight, Nathan Kung is going to be leading the presentation, really making sure that we're having a conversation about what that looks like for you. So a little bit about Nathan. He is currently a senior industrial engineering student at Georgia Tech. He has a concentration in supply chain engineering and is the current president of Georgia Alpha chapter. Previously, he served as the vice president of programming and the risk management chairman. Now he serves as a student director for SigEp's national board and is a member of the advisory board for the Southeastern Greek Leadership Association. He works for Manhattan Associates Incorporated, managing incident response frameworks and internal software tools. He has led strategic planning initiatives for his chapter's executive team and participated in the creation of the health and well-being component of Georgia Tech's 2020 to 2030 Institute Strategic Plan, ultimately impacting students, faculty, and staff across all departments at Georgia Tech. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic off to Nathan and let him get started here tonight. Again, please hold your questions and take note of those, and we will go ahead and answer those as the presentation is kind of wrapping up and before we jump into breakout rooms.
Oh yeah, thanks, Keaton. Sorry, Keaton. That's my my Sigma mentor's name, Keaton. Yeah, again, thanks everybody for being here tonight. The intent of this evening is to kind of just lay the ground roots for your election platform and to get everything up in order for the election season in the coming months. So just to give a brief overview of what we're going to be looking at tonight, we're going to cover a few things. I like to take this approach from a really analytical viewpoint where we're really focusing on data and things that formulating what is the current situation into how we can push towards the future. So we're then going to analyze our priorities and see how we can find some coherent themes and create a platform that's effective to everybody involved. And then most finally, we're going to actually do some platform creation and then go into breakout rooms at the end. The intent of this is to be really fluid. This was really intentionally led by undergrads. It's not supposed to be super formal. So we'll have some time for questions at the end, but if you think of anything as I'm going, feel free to throw it in the chat. We can address those things as they come up. And then we got some time for breakout rooms at the end. Myself, Greg, and Brady are all going to be picking up one of the breakout rooms. That'll also be a super informal format where we can answer questions. We can actually go into some examples and some of the more finer details, but just going to take the beginning of the session to give kind of an overview of what we're looking at. So by the end of this, our intent is that future chapter leaders, or hopeful future chapter leaders, will be able to take into account the needs of various stakeholders. So that's going to be guys in your chapter, your campus officials, your AVCs and alumni, the national fraternity, the other organizations on your campus, everybody who basically has a stake in what you're doing as a chapter. You're going to be able to generate a well-rounded view of your own chapter, so the things that affect your individual brothers on a daily basis. And then finally, we're going to create a coherent and powerful election platform. And before I really dig into it, one thing that I want to note is that the things that I'm about to mention are really widely used in other nonprofits. They're used in companies. They're also very useful for your own personal life. I can say, at least in my experience, that if you're able to go into a job interview and talk about some of these strategies and ideas, that you're going to probably blow 95% of candidates out of the water, just because it makes it clear that you're operating at a level that's very thought out and probably above and beyond what a lot of other people are doing. So kind of moving into an information gathering stage. So I personally, I'm an engineering student. I like to look at things from a very like analytical, data-driven, that kind of point of view. So this is always, at least in like the scientific method, I guess you could say, your first step into to research or an experiment or something like that is going to be gathering the existing information that's out there. So again, as I mentioned a minute ago, this is something that I've seen corporate management do at my own company. I've talked about brothers that have interned and co-opted different places. This is something that they see as well. And it's, I think, something that's actually pretty valuable. It tends when you're talking about it to sound like a lot of bureaucracy and politics and, you know, whatever. But I think at the end of the day, it does provide a pretty good return in terms of setting a plan for the future. So I choose to focus on 4 areas for this specific like chapter leadership exercise. It's going to be our fraternity values. So we all are familiar with virtue, diligence, brotherly love. Your personal values, your areas of interest, your passions, the things that you care about. These are the things that make you want to run for your executive team. Your chapter's historical operations. So how things worked in the past, how things have gone. That's good knowledge and knowledge to draw on. And then finally, your current chapter culture. So where are things now? Obviously, all of us are coming out of a tremendously difficult 2 years. And I think it's really good to look at how things have changed over the last couple of years. So looking at your current chapter culture is a really important part of that. So we're going to dig into these 4 areas and then kind of go into some goal setting at the end. And I'll mention as well that the strategic planning process typically includes the ideation and then your actual planning and then your implementation. So say you are elected to your executive board, that's when you're going to hit this implementation phase. And it might even be useful for you guys to do this again as a team, as an executive team at that point, and focus on what can happen for the future. So kind of digging into the first one of these, our fraternity values then. We're all familiar with these. I will point out that I think the biggest thing here and the biggest miss that a lot of people have is not really defining what these things mean to you. You know, virtue, diligence, and brotherly love, obviously really high ideals that we hold ourselves to. But it's, I think, a really good exercise for individuals to assign some meaning to that for themselves. So this came out, these examples here came out of our executive retreat last year with my chapter, and the things that we wanted to focus on. So this is something I suggest doing. Does not have to be formal. Get a sticky note and just kind of write your thoughts out. But for one, virtue, looking at honesty and transparency, we felt like our execs in the past hadn't really we didn't really know what they were doing on a daily basis, or like the decisions that they would make, where those would come from. So that was like a big thing for us going in, is we want to open this up to the whole chapter a lot more. Sexual assault awareness and prevention. Obviously, I'm sure you guys have seen like some of the protests and stuff going around the country right now. So that was a big one for us too, as we've gone through the year, is like, how do we be advocates for the right thing within our own chapter? Diligence, academic success is a huge one, especially coming out of the last year. So that was something that was big for us. Career programming is also really big, especially just with a lot of changes in how people are working remotely, how recruiting is happening remotely, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, brotherly love. Again, just like really harping on COVID in the last couple of years. Mental health and substance support has been a big one. Keeping the chapter together, cohesion and vulnerability between members, all really big things that we wanted to see. And that kind of helped us bring these just big ideas of virtue, diligence, and brotherly love kind of more down to a micro level for things that we can focus on within our chapter. So that I suggest doing that, do that alone, do that with a group of people. You can take 20 minutes at a chapter meeting and say like, hey, what do these things really mean to us? That way you can kind of adopt a shared vision with everybody that you've got to be on the same page about what your goals are. And moving along, it's going to be your passions and values. So the answer to this question is really like, what makes you want to run? What do you care about? Why are you stepping up into this role? So this is a good spot that I think I like to do: start, stop, and continue. This kind of boils down to things that we need to be doing, things that like really suck, and things that we would like to continue doing that I think we do well. I've got a recruitment example here. And this is all the examples in this presentation are going to be from my chapter. things that we've noticed over the past year or so. But we kind of lagged behind up until this past summer on our social media presence. We really picked that up a lot. We've started trying to use more brothers to contact PNMs, be the point of contact for somebody, be the guy that's like inviting them to things. You know, one of the things that we really found was that to stop was that we were using fairly vague recruitment criteria that ultimately boiled down to like, is this guy cool? Which is great, but I think we lose a bit of our diversity and the kind of people we bring in that way. And then one of our continue items was our recruitment events. We do all kinds of stuff from like cookouts to paintball to just kind of movie nights, whatever. And that's just, I think, something that we've found a lot of success with. So I think this is something that should be solely based on your opinion and what you think. You really don't need at this point to incorporate your brothers or anything else like that. That can come in one of the future things that I'm talking about. But this is kind of like, what are the things that really I don't like, or what are the things that I really like, or that kind of thing. What would I like to see in the future? So I think that's a really solid exercise to take up, and really helps kind of lay everything out in a really, you know, clear, categorized way. And then this is kind of the most vague one I've got. It's your chapter historical operations. So why do things work the way they do? And this is unfortunately not something that you can, you know, read in a book, or you can pick up from just kind of being around. This is something that like really requires you to kind of be involved with that role already. I think as we're looking towards election season, it's a really good point, if you haven't already, to step up and say to that executive position that you're trying to run for, like, hey, can I like just be filled in on whatever like emails are flying around, or whatever meetings you're having, or whatever you've been organizing, those kind of things. Because I think one of the biggest things that you can do in front of your chapter, and this is something that they'll talk about in the later sessions, is be able to say, yeah, like I've got a really good idea of what's going on. I know how things work. And it's kind of a way to be able to kind of say like you have some experience without really being in the role. I've got some examples down here. Again, this is like really just a knowledge-based thing and is fairly vague, but it's, for example, you know, for our house director just saying like, hey, this point last year, we had already like gotten all our leases for next semester signed back. Or like, we always use this company for this thing because an alumni owns it and we get a really good rate out of them. Or like, hey, then this last one is something that happened to me a month ago where our water bill came in at like $5,000 and it's usually like $600. And we were like, hold on, wait. And so those are some kind of big ones that like, you really can't just do it by being a good leader. You kind of have to know what's going on. So definitely get involved with your role, try to be aware of some of these things, and, you know, write these things down as you come upon them too. Keep good records, those kind of things, because these kind of things are the things that I think set good leaders apart from like good leaders who really know what they're doing and are ready. So I've got some other examples down here that y'all are welcome to read through about programming. These are all, again, real things from when I was RVP programming that I picked up on, I noticed, and they were really good areas for us to improve on once we figured them out. And then kind of shifting into your current chapter culture, I like to think about this as a Venn diagram. So if you've got one circle, that's, you know, the fraternity values and the things you've generated earlier, saying that you really care about. The other side of that Venn diagram being, what does everybody else care about? Because a lot of times, and I've found this in the last couple of years being on my chapter as exec, was that, like, for example, I was really passionate about one philanthropy event we had, and people would like participate, but they weren't really stepping up for it. So you got to find that intersection of like what you care about and what everybody else cares about. What doesn't motivate them. That's a really big one. How do you get people to come to things? How do you make people want to get up in the morning and come to ritual? Those are really big questions that you really have to know your brothers really, really well to be able to answer. So down here is a finance one. So, you know, my chapter, if you talk about raising dues $25, it requires a 3-hour discussion. That's something to know, because I think it's it really changes how you present those things to the chapter, how you go about campaigning on those things. My chapter always needs leniency in terms of dues payment plans. That's just kind of how our chapter is. I would love to be able to say like, hey, here's the due date and everybody pays on time, but that's not how it works, and unfortunately for me. So just having that knowledge, and then just know, like I said, with the motivation thing on the end, fines and fees don't usually motivate my brothers to do better. And I think that's a really big one too, is in any role of leadership, is if you're, your VP recruitment and guys aren't showing up to help during recruitment events or something like that, maybe a fine isn't going to work. Maybe you have to focus on how do you create value in a way that people are really going to want to be there. So I have a bullet on here that says pillars and corners. This is something that we talk about with our chapter. It's kind of like the four corners of our chapter. So my chapter's got kind of like the athletes, the guys that really like being in the gym, the guys that are running all the intramural sports, all that kind of stuff. We've got the guys who like to skateboard and listen to music all day. We've got guys that are, really involved with like their campus religious organizations or student organizations, and that's kind of their main theme. And then we've got guys that are just really like, they're SigEp guys, and that's what they do. One thing that I've found is anytime we've had to do something difficult, raising dues, changing our meal plan provider, having a formal in a different city than we originally talked about doing, if you can get a couple people from every single one of those corners or pillars to on board with you and what you're talking about, generally once you get up in front of the chapter, it's smooth sailing from there. If you can drive advocacy for yourself from those different sectors, then things will go a lot smoother. So that's something, a little bit more of a conversation for one of the later sessions, talking about your election day and your run up to election. But I think in creating your platform, think about what those people want, think about what they need, think about what they're going to want to be spending their social events or their social budget doing, because that gives you, I think, a lot more perspective and a lot more of a well-rounded view into your chapter. And then kind of continuing on your current chapter culture, we're going to look at a SWOT analysis. So this is something that one of the breakout rooms is going to touch on. If you want to get more into this is kind of just an example of something that I've looked at for my chapter. It breaks pretty much everything that's happening down into 4 separate categories, being strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So there's these headings here that kind of tell you that your strengths are helpful towards your objective or your goal. And then they're also internally generated. Weaknesses are things that come from inside the organization but are harmful. And then the opposite in terms of origin is true on the bottom too. So I've got a note down here. This is something that's good to do as a whole chapter, but in terms of preparing for and being on your executive team, I like to refer to external and internal as like referring to the executive board if you're running for president, or if you're running for recruitment, then your rush committee, your rush board, your programming committee if you're running for programming, those kind of things. So one thing to note, and this is kind of a difficult thing to talk through sometimes, is that there are people in all 4 of these categories. And I'm sure if you look at your chapter and you say like, who's a threat, you can absolutely point out who that is. It's the guy who's, showing up to events and like passing out in a bush in front of your house and like getting picked up by the cops. It's the guy who's like encouraging people to do things that are just like outwardly dangerous to your organization, that kind of stuff. Strengths, you probably also know who those guys are. They're the ones that, like when I was like a freshman, I know that there were a few guys in my pledge class that our chapter president would call and be like, hey, like there's something going on, I'm out of town, can you help? Those kind of things. Those are the people that get called on all the time. And the big ones and your things to work on are going to be your opportunities and weaknesses. So opportunities is a huge one from a leadership perspective. Those are the young guys that are looking to step up, looking to take responsibility. Maybe if you're running for VP programming, the guy that you think is going to be your social chair or your philanthropy chair. If you're running for president, somebody that's going to be your risk manager. People that can be your challenge coordinators, people that really haven't reached their full potential yet, but you can see it happening. And then on the kind of the flip side of that is going to be guys who are in the weaknesses category, guys who are involved, but maybe not delivering a quality contribution. So we've seen people before who like, yeah, he's like the social chair, but hasn't planned anything. Or like, you know, he's somebody who's like the sorority relations chair maybe, and we just haven't seen anything out of that all semester, those kind of things. So those are guys to look at for improvement. And then you've got some other items down in these boxes as well. So your strengths, what do you do well as a chapter? Intramurals is one. Our chapter does really well with our campus intramural events. Academics is possibly one of yours. Recruitment, we tend to recruit really well. Can be a really strong thing for us. Weaknesses, we've recently, especially since coming out of COVID, and I think this is probably common across the country, is attendance and participation. Getting people kind of bought back into what it means to be in a fraternity. That's a huge thing that I think is harming us right now, and we're trying to drive in the right direction. Opportunities are things that like are not bad, but you can see improvement on. So our awards for our chapter, we don't really win that many, but we totally could. It's one of those things where if you like, you know, I joked that I was sitting at Conclave and they were giving the Buck Cup presentation, and every time they would like start announcing the accolades of the chapter, and I'd be like, oh yeah, we did all that. And then like it would get to like the last thing and it'd be like, oh wait, that's not us, just over and over again. So that's something we can totally work on as a chapter. I think a big one for a lot of chapters is going to be your relationship with your IFC and your campus administration. That's obviously huge, and there's a lot of room to work with there. Threats, you know, campus policy can definitely be one of them, especially given the last year, as things have cropped up across different campuses, different issues with COVID and sexual assault and different things like that. And I don't say that to make campus officials the enemy, because they're certainly not. They can be a huge asset when you need them. But, you know, being somebody that's ready to be involved with your IFC or involved with your Greek life coordinator and things like that can really move that item from threats into an opportunity. So this was one that I generated as chapter president during our exec retreat last January. So things have changed a little bit, but I think this is a pretty good model. And like I said, if you're more interested in that, one of the breakout rooms is going to be going into that as well. And then finally, for actual like our platform generation. So what we've spent a lot of time doing thus far is thinking about what our chapter looks like now, how it's looked in the past, and what it needs to look like in the future. But this is going to be where you actually kind of set down some items and say, like, here's what I plan to accomplish. And this is when you're talking to guys before elections, this is the stuff they want to hear. You know, everybody has their ideas, and a lot of people really have some good things that they want to say. But if you can formulate your things in a very like coherent and well laid out way, it should really, I think, impress your guys. So looking at the SMART model, this is a goal setting model that our chapter counselor has led with us before. This is the same model that we used when we were creating Georgia Tech's strategic plan. So it's got some basis to it, and I know it's really widely used in different organizations all over the place. So your goals need to follow 5 criteria: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. So these are fairly self-explanatory, but your goals should be narrow as possible without getting into individual actions. The phrase that I use here is that your goals will be factual statements about the future. They won't be like, I'm gonna do XYZ. They're gonna be, this is where we're gonna be a year from now. Measurable, so you should have a number in there that like is gonna be very clear once you've achieved your goal. Attainable should be realistic. Relevant, it should pertain to the stuff that you've collected so far. So looking at that like kind of Venn diagram I made up earlier, we're saying things you care about and things that the chapter cares about. If it's outside of that intersection of those two things, then it might not be relevant to what you're trying to do. And then time bound, you should have a deadline on it. It should, a lot of times for exec roles, it's going to be the end of your term or the end of a semester. But there's also different things in there. And we can pull up some examples real quick just to look into these things. So here's some examples. I've got some handy traffic light colors to check off our criteria. So my chapter will receive 400 balanced band scholarship applications by the end of May 22. Yeah, very specific. It gets into exactly what you're trying to accomplish. It's measurable. We're looking at an exact number here. We're looking for this number of applications. Attainable. This I've got on yellow because this is going to depend on your chapter. Some chapters, this may be wholly realistic. If your chapter got 8 applications last year, maybe let's think about our goal a little bit. Relevant, it likely falls into your recruitment goals. And then time bound, you can see our deadline there, end of May 2022. So this one's only yellow because it's going to vary chapter to chapter, but this could be a very good goal to use. My chapter will do better with membership development this semester. Not a good example. This is not specific enough. This doesn't really touch on like any kind of specific area other than just like the broad umbrella of membership development. It's also not measurable. We have no way of saying like whether or not we've achieved this at the end of the term. It's attainable. You can always do better, but measuring that is obviously impossible. It's relevant. Obviously, we all want to do decent membership development stuff for our guys. So that's a big one. And time bound. I put this on yellow because there is not a specific deadline. It does say this semester, so that's kind of iffy. But you want more of a concrete like end of May 2022 or like end of the semester, end of the year. You want a firm date on it. Here we've got a pretty decent one. My chapters will increase its cumulative GPA by 0.2 by the end of this semester. Very specific, you know exactly what you're looking at, measurable. You can, at the end of it, you're going to be able to say, yes, we did this, or no, we didn't, no questions asked. Attainable, theoretically, this is attainable with the right amount of work. That's also something to look at with your chapter, but theoretically, this is pretty attainable. Relevant, obviously, this is meeting our goals in terms of academic success and that kind of thing. So I would say it's pretty relevant to what we're doing. And then time bound, end of this semester, we've got a defined amount of time to do it, and we'll be able to measure it at that time. And then finally, the last one I've got up on here is my chapter will raise $25,000 for our philanthropy before the end of the campaign on November 10th, 2021. Same thing as kind of the first one. It is specific, measurable, relevant, time bound. Attainable is a good question for your chapter. Will your guys step up to help raise all this money within the next less than a month? That kind of thing. So our chapter has made that happen before. So I would say it's attainable for Georgia Alpha, but that might not be the case for everybody. There are some chapters who may be able to double that number. I don't know, but these are just kind of some examples, and I've got the note down here. Attainability is a hard question to answer because it's wholly going to depend on your guys, how much they care about what you're doing, and their buy-in. And I'll note a couple things just on these goals as well, that none of these are specific actions. So I am not saying like, I'm going to make 10 social media posts about our philanthropy campaign, or I'm not saying I'm going to, communicate weekly with our Greek life coordinator. Those are not really the things you're looking at here. These are kind of your overarching goals. These should be the result of those specific actions. And you should be able to formulate specific actions from these in order to get there. So for example, this third one, my chapter will increase its cumulative GPA. You should be able to sit down and generate like, hey, so we're going to have the standards board is going to create an academic plan, and anybody below a 2.5 is going to have to meet with them every week. That's a specific action towards that goal. Anybody that's got above a 3.5 is going to get rewarded in X way at the end of the semester. That's a specific goal to help achieve what you're trying to do. So the last thing about these as well is these are completely meaningless if you don't check back in on them later. So close to your deadline or shortly thereafter, you should be reviewing this kind of stuff and saying like, okay, the semester just ended, where's our GPA sitting at? Or semester just ended, how many scholarship applications did we get? Those kind of things. So you have to really commit to looking at these again later, but as you're formulating a platform for a campaign, that's again, something that would happen down the road. I only say that just because it's really necessary to be able to like kind of think about that as a possibility in order to make some good statements here. And just some kind of final concluding thoughts. Don't focus on changing everything. Minimally disruptive improvements are the best. There's a lot of people in different nonprofits, that kind of thing, that have a philosophy of like, if they take a new position in management, they don't change anything for 90 days because they want to get a real feel for what's going on. Unfortunately, with a 1-year term, we don't really have the luxury of doing that. But I think my main point here is, don't worry about reinventing the wheel or uprooting the entire system. Certain things that may need to happen too, but I think I've heard a lot of leaders, a lot of people in my own chapter talk about like, I'm going to change this and I'm going to change this and I'm going to change this and I'm going to change this, which is all great. But at the end of the day, there's still a chapter to run and you've still got some really critical tasks that you have to execute beyond just like making things better. So make sure you're letting people know in your platform too that you're committed to keeping things running and then making these changes as you can and as you find good opportunities. Also, really just don't tell people just what they want to hear. That is absolutely your enemy. And while it may be fantastic for a platform and convincing people to vote for you, it will make your life awful once you actually take a position because you're not going to be able to execute on the things that you committed to. So make sure you're being really authentic with what you're saying, that you're really committed to the ideas you're putting out there, those kind of things. Don't worry about being perfect. This is something that I think I've seen my chapter's executive officers go through. At the end of the day, this is a volunteer position. You're donating your time to do it. So not everything's going to be perfect. Not everything's going to go great all the time. You might not have an answer to every single question that's going to be asked about your platform or what you're running on. That's fine. Try to think about some of those things ahead of time and formulate some good answers, but nothing's ever going to be perfect in this world. And I think that's something that's just really important to reinforce as we look at these things. Focus on optimism, focus about good things in the future. That's, I think, something that you can get tied up in with, especially later in the year if you're on exec, when you're feeling a little bit burnt and tired. But as you're creating your platform, remember the future is a good thing. Your outlook should be up above the horizon. And then finally, just remember why you're doing what you're doing. I've seen executive officers come through and they really have a lot of big goals, but they don't always line up exactly with what the chapter needs. I referenced the SigEp creed that we use when we give bids to individuals. The part of it that says, "I believe that a man will be made better for having been a member of my fraternity." That's a big one. We talk about that as an exec all the time, saying we're doing this because we have brothers that we really want to support. We really want to see guys have a great time. We wanted them to be developed, both from a career perspective, academic perspective, personal perspective, all those kind of things. So remind yourself why you do what you do, why you want to take this role. And that's a really big one. I think the next slide says breakout sessions. Real quick, I just want to point out this slide deck does have at the end some resources. It's got some templates on here. If you want to look at these, I believe this deck is going to be sent out with the recording as well. So there's some templates on SMART goals and SWOT analysis. There's a university strategic plan. This is the one that I helped create for Georgia Tech. Highly recommend just typing in your university's name and strategic plan after it. I'm certain there's one out there. And then there's the SigEp National Strategic Plan as well, which is kind of going to be what the national headquarters is pushing over the next several years. So that's a pretty good resource for trying to formulate some of your own ideas as well. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Keaton and we can move towards our breakout sessions.
Awesome job, Nathan, on sharing those resources and really just kind of digging in a little bit deeper as to what that looks like.